specifically told the Attorney General he was dealing with the Russians. To explain what's happening and what could be at stake, we welcome now from Washington, Stephen Pomerantz. He's former FBI Assistant Director. Welcome, Mr. Pomerantz. Good to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So give us a sense of how much trouble Jeff Sessions is in at this point.
I don't think he's in a whole lot of trouble. I think I think the important thing is always in all of these things is to tell the truth. As we say repeatedly, the cover-up is often worse than the crime. As long as he sticks to the truth, I think he's probably okay in the long run.
But, Mr. Pomerantz, this is the third shot, as I counted up, of Attorney General Sessions. The first time he said, I didn't deal with the Russians. I didn't know about anybody else dealing with the Russians. Then they had him back up there last month, and they said, well, wait a second. Now we know that you met with the ambassador. Different people. He said, well, it wasn't systematic. I mean, and now he's going to say, well, they told you that they were dealing, that the campaign was dealing. Doesn't this get a little difficult? They're sort of slicing the salami here a little bit?
Yes, it does. Obviously, the appearance is problematic. But again, I think it's more the substance than it is the appearance of what took place in those conversations. Look, a U.S. senator meets with a lot of people, and 99% of those are innocuous and can be explained. Yes, he's told somewhat conflicting stories. But again, I think the important thing is the substance of what took place in those conversations and at those meetings. And again, setting the record straight.
Yeah, and we will hear from the Attorney General directly shortly, but as I understand it, what the reports have been is that although Mr. Papadopoulos told him I'm dealing with the Russians, Mr. Sessions said don't do that anymore, stop it. So does this tell us anything about the overall direction or substance of the special counsel Mueller's investigation?
You know, the special counsel's investigation is going to be very far-ranging. It's going to be in-depth. It's going to go on for a long time, and it's going to examine a lot of issues. You know, it gets a lot more difficult and a lot more political, frankly, because there's one issue about to what extent that the Russians tried to interfere in the in the recent elections, and the Russians have been doing that kind of activity for decades. I'm certain they're going to find some evidence of the Russians' attempt to interfere with our election. I think that's a given. The more important question, I suspect, is was there criminal collusion between anybody in the Trump campaign and the Trump organization and the Russians toward that end? And that's a much more difficult and much more elusive proposition. And you got to kind of, I think, to look at this thing intelligently, you have to separate those two issues. Frankly, the politicization of these things, people have some people have proclivity to try purposely to cloud those two issues, and that'll continue through the course of this. Through the course of this entire special counsel investigation.
So, Stephen, you've done some of these investigations, so you know how they work.
I have.
From the outside, give us a sense here, because there are probably relatively few people who actually know the answer to the question, was there collusion or not? And it appears, from what we've seen so far, for example, with the indictment of Mr. Manafort, that what Mr. Mueller is doing actually is going after some of those key figures for perhaps ancillary issues, not having directly to do with Russian interference, to try to get them to cooperate the way Mr. Papadopoulos did. How long a process is that? How difficult? How likely is he to succeed?
Well, you've asked us several questions. In terms of how long the process is, no one can answer that. It can go on as long as the special counsel thinks that he needs to go. I mean, again, look at, I guess, the classic case is the Whitewater investigation in the Clinton era. Who would have thought that an examination of the Rose Law Firm corporate records would end up with a stain on Monica Lewinsky's dress, and how long it took? And people at the end of that were starting to ask how much money was invested in that investigation. First time in my career that I ever remember people seriously asking, how much money are we spending on this? So this can go on as long as the special counsel thinks it's necessary to go on. And you're exactly right. There may well be, in fact, I would be surprised if there weren't more ancillary charges that come out of that. They're looking at a lot of people who have complex business arrangements.
Right.
I wouldn't be. I'd be surprised if there weren't additional ancillary charges. So, and you're right again that what they attempt to do is when they charge people with ancillary crimes to have them cooperate toward the toward the larger goal.
Stephen Pomerantz, former FBI Assistant Director, thank you very much for being with us. And Michael Purvis of Whedon, thank you for being with us for the entire hour. Jonathan.
We just kept him around because we're going for a beer straight after the show, and he just likes sitting around for 20 minutes. Michael Purvis.
We appreciate that.
Whedon, great to catch up with you. 26 minutes into the session. Here's a story to market for you. The third down day in 4.